Alrighty then, it's time for a Jungle Kindred game. Let's get the show on the road. So, yeah, a Kindred game. Finally, I haven't even ever released one. So, and you're probably going to say, Stonewall, finally a Kindred game. What happened? Well, for starters, I kind of wanted to play her, and I decided on this account not just play whatever the hell I want, and especially weird champions, because I just felt bored that day. And Kindred was one of the main ones I wanted to play, because, to be honest, I didn't always give her the fairest shot, but she does have a lot of things to write home about in terms of negativity. For starters, she's not all that useful and her role isn't really important, so there's never really a reason to pick her unless you just kind of want to. Now, I've been very vocal of my opinions on Kindred in the past. For starters, I don't like her release. Initially, I was excited because Marksman Jungle, but eventually, I just hated how it happened. Okay, I haven't played her that much, and I haven't actually played her since that rework she received some time ago, so you'll see a lot of mistakes, but you'll see me adapt to them eventually, so just sort of keep in mind that the early game as Kindred is a little bit mediocre. Anyways, Kindred's release was marred by the fact that Riot kind of just wanted a marksman to be a jungler, and they made Kindred into that. They overcompensated her tremendously, giving her basically every tool to make sure she worked out. They gave her some stacking passive to artificially increase her damage potential because Riot knew she'd be gold starved. As you know, junglers, pound for pound, the gold they receive if they're not just killing people is far less than, than laners. So think of a marksman who needs items and not having, and needing a lot more gold than the jungle could provide if she's not really getting any kills. So they gave her that passive to compensate for that. They gave her a bunch of stats on her abilities. They gave her some huge chunk sustain when she's fighting monsters. They gave her a way to dodge abilities and kite around and everything. And then they gave her an ultimate that doesn't take into account whether you're poor or rich. So it's a very strong utility ultimate, if you use it properly at least. So they gave her a lot of stuff to make sure she at least functioned as a champion, and it created the problem in which she had too many little widgets they needed to control when it came to balance. So you'd have this situation where you just had to fiddle with a lot of things. You couldn't just leave her as is, but what could you change? Which is what prompted them to make some kind of rework at some point. Even though that rework didn't really solve her core issues. Which her main core issue is that she's a marksman in the jungle. And the thing is, it's like I mentioned, it's just not a role that exists or needs to be filled. Or, I mean, it could be filled for the niche, but it's not going to really be properly used for the aforementioned gold situation. Now, in a creative or dream world, what would happen is that she would be played if the bottom lane went, if the bottom lane went some kind of double kill lanes, like Jarvan Leona, for instance, that old classic kill lane, or something like that, or where two marksmen became a thing and the top laner was just strictly a tank and you needed some kind of double marksman compositions. It could make some sense, but even so, that's just not likely to happen. It's just League is a little bit set in its ways with how the jungle has to work because it is the most masochistic role in the game. That said, Kindred also kind of suffer from the fact that, sustained damage is generally not the greatest thing in the game unless you're super, super farmed. And again, gold from the jungle is not the most reliable. So when other marksman junglers became better or, became a thing that happened, they were more, hybrid-y than she was. Now, Kindred, aside from, using some proper use of your Q and your E, your damage is mostly going to come from your pew-pews, right? Now, think of other champions like Graves, and then Ezreal. Graves, he was pretty much an accidental jungler, right? Riot probably banked on him being this kind of kill lane burst bottom laner, but that obviously didn't work out. But it turned out he could jungle really well. And ridiculously effective. He was basically a bruiser with range and with some assassination potential because of the burst he had if you did his animation canceling. And that is far better. That's like when it comes to the jungle, you want that kind of stuff. You want a bruisery champion who has some, survivability without having to invest a ton of gold. And burst damage is super valuable because it makes surprising enemy champions and ambushing them far stronger. And Kindred just kind of can't do that. Of course, Graves eventually did receive his own nerfs because that shit's kind of dumb. But even then, when Graves was prevalent, you never saw that whole thing where they abandoned an actual marksman in the lane because they knew they still needed that. Then Ezreal became a thing as well. You know, another Ezreal, AD carry Ezreal, or jungle AD carry Ezreal. His whole shtick was pretty much the same thing. He has burst potential with his Q, and it makes his clearing artificially stronger because he can just charge up his passive and do a chunk load of damage with his Q. And it kind of revolved around the same thing, popping out and just shooting someone down really quickly, and you know, at a distance, blinking around, stuff that Kindred just doesn't have. And mobility, for instance, aside from, you know, your Q, and good luck using having to use 2 cooldowns for that. But yeah. And Quinn is also technically a thing, but Quinn is her own kind of issue, I guess. Either way, the point being is that Kindred came out, she was strong, they nerfed her down, and then she became kind of weird because all the other marksmen who weren't supposed to be junglers and were junglers were kind of just far more useful than her because burst is just better. But whatever. By the way, there I messed up my ultimate because I didn't know that it was no longer targeted, because that's how rare I've seen a Kindred and how I had just simply hadn't played her or ever read up on her again. So I guess that was a huge screw up, but you won't see me do that again. Yeah, this game, it got a little bit more action packed around the mid game, but you saw, you know, it's pretty messy. For me, I just was struggling to get stacks and getting much done, and it was pretty frustrating, honestly, just because I'm not used to playing Kindred, and the enemy teams, and you know, to their credit, were pretty much on the ball of denying me my stacks. But either way, overall, playing Kindred in this game, she was amusing, but her early game was so not fun to play. Like, it's so rigged against you as playing her in the early game, and they kind of have to do that because the other weakness, not of the champion, but of balancing these kinds of things, marksman junglers, is that if they're really strong in the early game, that means they've had the potential to get farmed up, right? You know, kill a few things. And then that means they snowball out of control during team fights because they can just destroy people. Now, this problem sounds familiar too, right? Because Ezreal as an early game marksman is pretty goddamn strong. And he did become really serious because if he got a few kills, he'd snowball the mid game and then just kind of win off that. Anyways, you can see that ultimate I used was an actual bait. During the stream and during the game, I meant to get attacked or lure one of them in there so they can jump on me, cast my ultimate, everybody just sort of knocks them down and then they get killed. That's what I was hoping for. But it kind of worked. We got Warwick and Rakan, whatever his name is, and then a tower. So hooray. As far as her ultimate works now, I did find myself enjoying it better when it's cast on myself rather than casting it on a homie, because it was very weird trying to maintain a certain proper range with her not to get killed, but at the same time wanting to cast her ultimate. So now it sort of just became a thing where you just cast it on yourself and hope for the best. A little bit dumber, but a little bit, you know, more useful as a result, or at least functional as a result. Either way, the build I'm taking was basically the same thing I saw from OPGG. No, OPGG, and then I also looked it up in the champion guides, or whatever that other website is called. I looked it up, and yeah, you know, apparently there's games being played as her, but it didn't have a lot of alternate builds for her, so I just kind of took the first one, having stuff like Static Shiv and the cannon thing. Essentially, you wanting some mobility and to give yourself a little bit of burst for your first couple shots. That's at least what I saw from the build. I can't really speak too much for it. Anyways, as you can see, I'm trying to hang out by the outskirts mostly, waiting for somebody to get a little bit too ham and then just shoot them down. It's probably one of those weaknesses that she's going to have for a while, or any champion in her position is going to have for a while, or just junglers in general, because if there's one thing that's always made me sad about being a jungler, is that, you know, if you don't play the tank, likely no one else really is. In fact, during Champion Select of this game, I was just like, I said, I finally locked in Kindred because I played 2 games prior to this, and I just couldn't lock her in because everyone else would pick some really weird team composition, some champions, and make us super weak. So I decided, fuck it, I'll finally play Kindred. Anyways, I got cut Benar. My ultimate keeps me alive long enough I mean, to still die, but long enough for my teammates to show up and finish off the Gnar. Essentially, wasting his time and getting him trapped and killed. So hooray, that works out. Either way, if I see any changes to Kindred that could make her viable? Not really, and that's the sad part, in which she by herself isn't really too inherently weak anymore. Like, she's got issues, like some really steep issues. I would say she's more below average, but it's not as grossly disproportionate as a lot of people might assume. It's just there's not really that much point in picking her, so she's just gonna continuously fall off the wayside. Anyways, I'll talk about our weakness after there's a little fight. So, the enemy team clusters up and gets pretty much destroyed by a barrel of Gangplank. Two of them go down, but we're super low in health. But thankfully, chasing down the enemy, or the Ezra getting himself killed by the dragon as it flaps him closer to my shots, helped us out quite a bit. We still only went, we still killed 3 enemy champions. We only lost 1 and we got a dragon, so that's real nice for us. But anyways, as I was saying about Kindred, one of her main issues is just, again, the whole limitations of champion picking or team comp selection. And in general, what you kind of want to do at her, what she encourages us to do is to be super aggressive in jungling in terms of like invasion or early ganks and that kind of stuff. But she's not really the best. I mean, early on, she was a really dangerous jungle duelist who would show up and just destroy you, and especially if she had double buff. But now if she were to jump at you or come at you, unless she had that red buff with her, she'll just die really quickly. So she's a champion that encourages invasions or controlling certain objectives in order to get those her passive stacks, but she's not strong enough to deal with most of the jungle champions to do that safely. Like, Warwick's not always one of them early on. I was just too afraid of fighting him. But yeah, that was really good Gnar ultimate that happened a couple seconds ago, and then it led to pretty much an even result from this. Where the Gnar died, and then all weird clusterfuck happens. Ezreal gets chased, and Nivea is a little bit too scared, and I believe she does have an egg, so she shouldn't be too afraid. Warwick gets pulled in closer, and then we just kind of go ham on him. At this point, though, because I've finally gotten some early stacks and getting some itemization, lo and behold, the marksman is just wrecking them. So, considering how new I was to Kindred and how bad my mistakes early on were, I can easily say that we're not really having any swings because of Kindred, more so just because, natural AD carry getting gold, or marksman. Because by no means am I carrying as hard as Varus was. Jesus. But yeah. Essentially put Kindred, she was fun, but I can't really justify her being picked out of desire to want to play her, right? That's the best way I can put it. If I didn't want to play her, I wouldn't be at a loss not to learn her, right? It doesn't help that she's so expensive. It doesn't help that Riot kind of made it so she probably couldn't lane properly either, because I do remember there were arguments to be had for her not being exactly a marksman in the bottom lane, but in top lane, because she was a little bit dangerous and had quite a bit of poke, and if you dance properly you destroy some matchups. But no, they kind of just dumpstered her onto the jungle. I guess they can try to reworking her passive to be a lot less super RNG and stupid, but they probably won't. It's probably one of the easier things they can do to make her at least a lot more consistent, because holy crap. I mean, this is the first game I played, but I'm imagining other games where the enemy jungler is just super invading me and it's controlling every single little seal or passive or whatever it's called, and I just can't get any sort of power. Again, in this game, my first few passive stacks just came from the fact that I killed the right targets at the right time, but I kept screwing that up. So yeah, I know. For those who are fans of Kindred, don't worry, I'm not completely bashing her or saying you shouldn't play her. Oh, you definitely should, especially if you're comfortable as her. But I will play her some more probably on this account to try to see if I can, figure her out better and, give some better judgment. But this is sort of like my super late first impressions, I guess. But yeah. Because admittedly, it was pretty cool coming around, mid to late game, where I was able just to burst people down and do quite a bit of damage if I stood there and shot my little deer arrows at them. Here, by the way, I screw up. I was trying to get myself to the edge of the circle, so the second it popped, I would jump away and scamper off and survive. But nah, I got a little bit too far and got killed. So hooray me. But yeah, at this point, the enemy team kind of fell apart because they're not fighting cohesively, and the damage from my team is starting to scale up tremendously. I mean, look at the Varus. He's a sexy beast, and he's just kind of one man destroying them, right? Anivia too. She's pretty big and strong. She's got 11 kills, and she was doing quite a bit of damage. Gangplank and I are more like the supports in here. Not supports, but more like we'll help you wound people and then finish them off. But yeah. Thankfully, at least, though, this game didn't go as badly as I had hoped, because I've seen some Kindred games against my opponents and against just seeing someone stream, and I've seen games where the Kindred just doesn't get moving at all. Like, it's one of those very stale kind of games, and she then just proceeded to be absolutely worthless. Whatever the case, the enemy team is basically just trapped in their base, and we're just making the slow grind to destroy them. So hooray for Kindred. Finally, she got a video from Stonewall, which might not be the happiest thing for some people because they might feel I criticize their champion too much, but it's okay. By the way, hooray for victory. And if you liked this video, remember to give it a like. And if you aren't subscribed, make sure to subscribe. And if you are subscribed, make sure to hit the little bell up there somewhere so you actually get notifications to my videos, because YouTube and stuff.